Today I have Justus Ott with me, who already has a lot of experience with equipment control. That's what we're talking about today. We want to show you what the most important things are that can happen during an equipment control. Many of you who have not yet experienced this may be coming to a championship for the first time. Then it might be interesting to see what happens there. Justus, when do you ever get your clothing checked? Or how often does it happen?
There are, of course, checks at national championships, German championships, international competitions, European championships, world championships, and World Cups. At the national and German championships, there is a pre-clothing check before the competition, and this is voluntary. And I also recommend that you go there so that you know straight away that your clothes fit, because after the competition about 10% are drawn by lot, which are then taken from the range directly after the competition. And then you can be sure that everything fits with the clothes.
Oh, that's how it is. So really do it. Use it when you're somewhere at the championships, especially if it's your first time there, because it happens again and again that you are drawn by lot for the final inspection. As a rule, the first place finishers or the finalists always go to the final inspection. But as Justus says, some are also drawn out, which would be annoying. Imagine you are finally qualified, you've shot a great result. And then afterwards you realize that something doesn't fit, which might be a small thing. And that's why we're showing that now, so that you know what's going on and what's important. Maybe we'll just go through the jacket before we measure. Leave it on again briefly, perhaps from the outset, because he may have had a club jacket at the beginning where the buttons were adjusted. For example, the overlap of the button that remains here must not be more than 10 centimeters. Just take a yardstick, hold it here briefly, and measure it, and then the first problem is gone. It's particularly common for younger athletes or something like that to get a jacket that's too big from the club, and then it can happen quickly. So just measure the 10 centimeters here. We'll show the overlap separately later. What we definitely want to show is what is actually measured with this stiffness measuring device, and Justus simply throws his jacket on it. So now we just want to show you briefly what happens and what is measured. And of course, this is a high-tech product that consists of many, many pieces. And how is that, Justus? Does it just fit, or is it made to measure? Well, it's made to measure. Exactly. Perhaps we can briefly mention what's so important. When we measure all the parts that make up the jacket, for example, we measure the thickness and stiffness, which is what we're going to do. And of course, the manufacturers have to adhere to certain rules. This means that there must not be any stiffening in it. That's all. It has to be flexible somewhere. And it's a good thing that it adapts a little. For example, there are several layers of this material. If you look at what you have in your youth club, you may also be familiar with double-strength canvas from the past. And in this case, there are now several layers, and they must not be glued or quilted. This inner lining has to be virtually unlined, to put it bluntly. So you can't just say you can sew through it, but you don't really have to worry about that because it's the job of the person who makes the jacket. But you should perhaps have heard that there are certain rules and why some things are perhaps a little more complicated. But Justus has already said that he doesn't worry about it. Have you ever had any problems, or where are you? You've already been checked everywhere.
I've never had any fear that I would have to help or that I wouldn't get through the clothing check.
Okay, so from that point of view, it's good, because I think it's important that you can just go there relaxed. Okay, so I've already said that all items are measured. I'm only going to do it on one part as an example, because otherwise we wouldn't be finished. One is the thickness. In principle, you can also measure this with this measuring device. If I simply reset it to 0 beforehand, and now look at how thick this material is. So of course, when the tester puts this on, the whole jacket should be lying on the table and nothing should be hanging down anywhere. You might want to be careful. It often happens. And of course, if something is hanging down, then the jacket pulls a little differently and the measurement can be wrong. And then I just have to see how thick this material is. And it must not be thicker than 2.5 millimeters. And we can already see that it's 2.4 millimeters. So everything is fine. Have you ever measured before?
In Peru,
Probably never. That would be one thing. And then I still have the option, if I reset the whole thing to 0 here, then I have to measure this stiffness, so to speak. And here the value has to reach 3 millimeters, and it has 1 minute to do this. In other words, I now move the lever here and the whole thing is deflected. And then you can see how the numbers simply go up, and then we basically have 1 minute, and then I have to reach these 3 millimeters, and that's where we were within a few seconds. And we can see that we're even slightly over it, so you're completely safe. 3 decimal points, what do we have now? 2 in the meantime. So from that point of view, it fits. And of course, during the pre-inspection, where Justus says it will definitely work, all parts of this jacket are measured. And during the follow-up inspection, 3 parts are measured and at least 2 must fit. So if something doesn't fit somewhere, that's not so bad. Then it's okay. Exactly. What you can perhaps also say is that everything is, of course, precisely defined in the regulations. You can read through them, but it's no fun. Also, for example, this force that presses on it here is 1 kilo in size or 1 kilo in weight, you have to say, with which this deflection takes place. But you shouldn't concern yourself with that. But then you have a bit of an idea of what's happening. Okay, let's briefly summarize it again, perhaps. So, as I said, there are certain rules for how the jacket is made. No stitching.
Not only for the jacket, but also for the undergarments.
For the undergarment and also for the trousers, of course.
Yes.
It's the same for the trousers, so they are measured in the same way. The trousers are measured from the outside, and the jacket is measured from the outside, and then the trousers are measured from the inside. And the thickness of the undergarments is also measured so that you don't just put on more and more. So if you have several layers on, everything is measured together. So don't just say, oh, it's cold today, I'll put another sweater on underneath. Then the sweater would also be measured, and suddenly it would be outside the rule, and that wouldn't be so good, of course. Okay, so let's summarize very briefly. There are rules for the jacket, not glued, not sewn through, and not stiffened in any way, so you can't do anything yourself. We had the thickness of 2.5 millimeters, the stiffness of 3, and apart from that, we actually have that. Now I would say, let's show the overlap. That might also be interesting. Slip it back into the jacket, and then let's show the overlap.